And as we continue to listen to this beautiful Mass, joining us now from Detroit is Dr. Sam Gregg. He's Director of Research at the Acton Institute for the Study of Religion, and Liberty. Welcome, Dr. Gregg. Give us your impressions of this Mass.
Well, this Mass, of course, is reminding us of the eternal sacrifice that all Catholics participate in every Sunday. But of course, this has a special significance because this reminds us of the suffering that John Paul II has undergone for the past 2 months in particular, but also over the past couple of years, as he's dealt with Parkinson's disease, as he's dealt with many of the ailments that face many people at the end of long and sometimes difficult lives. And I think it's very appropriate, of course, that this Mass is being celebrated on the Feast of Divine Mercy. Very early in his pontificate, the Pope actually wrote an entire encyclical on this whole subject of divine mercy, and it was a meditation upon the meaning of suffering. Suffering is a subject that we often find, particularly in the West, very difficult to understand, and we're very uncomfortable with it. But John Paul II gave us a very clear, concise, Christian way of understanding the meaning of suffering in the modern world and for contemporary people, which I think is something that's applicable not just for Catholics, not just for other Christians, but for all people.
And of course, he suffered more than just recently, suffered being shot, an attempted assassination. He suffered Parkinson's over recent years. And as we all observed, he was working nonetheless right up to the end, where he came out and he could barely talk, barely get words out, and he never gave in, never gave up. Was that part of his message in suffering?
Yes.
That you're supposed to keep on going to live the will of the Father?
Yes, this is very much implicit to the Christian understanding of life. It's particularly something that the Catholic Church has always emphasized. But you're also right in the sense that this goes right back as a theme throughout the Holy Father's life. Remember, as a young man, he was forced to work in a quarry, effectively as a form of a slave laborer by the Nazis. During the communist period, he, like most other priests, suffered in small ways from petty harassment by Communist Party officials. He had to put up with a lot of misunderstanding, I think, on a psychological level, on a philosophical level, on a theological level, from people who didn't want to hear the messages that he was proclaiming to the world. So the suffering that he endured, and which I think he holds up to us as a witness, is not something that just physically he experienced. It's something that is a theme that transmutes all his life. It's also something that he wrote about himself, as I mentioned, not just as a pope, but as a poet. As a philosopher. He was tremendously interested in this entire question of why are human beings so inhumane to other human beings. He looked at the experience of his own people, the Polish people, under Nazi Germany, because they ended up getting rid of the Nazis and ending up with, guess what, another bunch of totalitarian thugs. And that, I think, really was something that caused him to ask some fundamental questions about why does human suffering occur? Why do people do inhumane things to other people? And his response was, of course, classic Christian answers. These things happen because of sin, original sin, and also the free choice of us to commit sin all the time. And of course, the response of this, the response of the Christian disciple that John Paul II, I think, tried to model, was, of course, love, forgiveness, but also to speak truth, especially moral truth, to naked power. If you like, it was the classic Christian response to the very contemporary Nietzschean way that we approach these questions of human division, human suffering, and the way we try and avoid these questions. And I think that by living this out in this particular way, he's brought it home to people in a very personal way that people like me can write about and talk about, but it's very hard to actually model. And I think that that has been one of the great successes of this pontificate right at the very end.
Another quality that Pope John Paul had was this fearlessness, really. He would say, be not afraid. He would go places where he certainly would not have been welcomed, like Cuba. Where do you think this fearlessness came from?
This fearlessness came from that Christian theological virtue of hope. People who have hope have no reason to be afraid. People who have hope of salvation have no fear of death. I think this was very important when it came, for example, to confronting communism. One of the great things when he went back to Poland in 1979, one of the great things he did was he made it very clear to the Polish people that you have nothing to be afraid of, because this system is built upon lies. It's built upon lies about the human person, and truth will always overcome lies. And that fearlessness, I think, was derived from this hope, but this hope firmly grounded in truth, this Christian truth which he was not afraid to proclaim. Of course, many Christians today are afraid to talk about their faith, but I think in many respects he did this in a way that was compelling, it was personal, but it was instantly capable to millions of people throughout the world. I'll never forget, for example, when he confronted the Marxist Sandinista government in Nicaragua, when they basically tried to manipulate the entire mass so that it would look like it was some sort of people's spontaneous support for this communist regime. And he stood up to them. He was not afraid to deal with these people because he was completely certain that what he was teaching was indeed the truth, and that the truth will always overcome lies, no matter how dark things seem.
Dr. Sam Gregg, appreciate your thoughts, sir, as we continue to watch the Mass for the repose of the soul of the Holy Father there in St. Peter's Square.